I never thought that my going fishing would free the entire condominium from Karen's tyranny. All the neighbors thanked me, and I enjoyed it because I was able to overcome the system. The sun hadn't even finished stretching over the Georgia Hills pines when I rolled my truck up the gravel drive, worn out from a 3-day fishing trip and reeking of catfish slime and poor decisions. All I wanted was a hot shower, a fat slice of peach pie, and maybe a nap in the hammock I'd tied between my old pecan trees. That was it, real simple. But the moment I rounded the corner of my house, I stopped dead in my tracks and nearly dropped the bait cooler. My backyard, my pride and joy, wasn't a garden anymore. Nope. It had somehow been transformed into the set of a discount wedding magazine shoot. There was a whole altar, decked out in white silk and fake roses, surrounded by a sea of folding chairs as far as the eye could see. To top it off, there was a string quartet warming up under one of those pop-up tents you get at Costco. And right where my tomatoes used to grow, someone had planted a full-blown champagne bar. I just stood there, stunned, mouth hanging open like a busted screen door. That's when this woman, barely old enough to rent a car, comes speed-walking past me in heels and a lavender dress, gripping a clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. She was shouting about flower arrangements running late, didn't even spare me a glance. A few of my neighbors, bless 'em, waved at me from their little folding chairs like I was the help. Carl, from 2 doors down, actually asked if I'd be a pal and grab him a lemonade. I was too dumbfounded to speak, and that's when she showed up. Karen Whitmore, HOA president, full-time dictator, owner of the world's most weaponized smile, and the personality of a sunburn. She strutted out from behind the altar like she was Queen of the South, rhinestone visor on her head, walkie-talkie on her hip, and a clipboard gripped in her French-tipped talons like it held the keys to the kingdom. "Oh, Hank," she chirped, walking over with that fake socialite charm like nothing was out of the ordinary. "You're back early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." I stared at her like she'd just crawled out of a manhole. "Karen, why is there a wedding happening in my yard?" She blinked at me like I'd asked her what the moon was made of. "It's Brianna's big day, remember? My daughter. We needed a space with, rustic charm and dreamy southern lighting. Your backyard is just perfect. Yeah, and there is also my shed, my irrigation system, and my garden." She gave a little dismissive wave, like I was talking about crabgrass. "Relax, we left your weird herbs alone. We just needed a little ambience. The photographer says your oak tree catches the golden hour like a dream. You'll thank me later." She paused. "Just stay out of the frame, okay?" I don't even remember walking away. Next thing I knew, I was parked on the porch with a bourbon in hand and a white-hot rage curling up my spine like kudzu. My entire backyard had been hijacked, taken over like some sort of public event space, without so much as a warning or a sticky note on the door. No heads up, no permission, just a full-blown invasion, complete with florists, caterers, and a 12-piece wedding band unloading amps onto what used to be my turnip patch. I called the sheriff, civil matter, called the county assessor. They said my land had been pulled into the HOA's clause a decade ago, and if I had a problem, I'd need to take it up with the board. So I did, straight to voicemail. Karen had run a play on me, and I didn't even realize I was in the game. Some obscure HOA clause about shared community space under special celebratory circumstances, or some such nonsense. She called it easement privilege. I called it trespassing on steroids. That night, while the rehearsal dinner buzzed with cheap champagne and fake laughter, I sat quietly on my porch and watched a bunch of strangers clink glasses and take selfies on my land. One of them asked if I was the gardener. Another tossed me their car keys and asked if I could move their BMW. Karen? She just smiled like she was running for mayor, told everyone I was the colorful local. I smiled too, nodded politely. See, folks forget sometimes, when they mistake quiet for weakness, that a man sitting still doesn't mean he's not planning something. By 10 o'clock, once the planners had packed up and waddled off to their rental cars, I wandered to the edge of my yard, and stared at the spot where my tomatoes used to thrive. My chest ached. I thought of my late wife. God, how she loved that garden. How she used to string lights through those same trees for our anniversary dinners. How she'd smile and say, "If someone crosses the line, don't shout, just build a taller fence or find louder friends." I lit a cigar and took a long, slow draw. The next morning, I pulled on my boots, grabbed my phone, and headed 15 minutes down Route 12 to the Chrome Mule, a half-bar, half-biker den wrapped in tin siding with a yard full of beat-up motorcycles and busted lawn chairs. Real classy. But inside, that place was holy ground. Veterans, gearheads, bikers, misfits. The kind of folks who understood private property and weren't afraid to raise hell if you messed with it. I walked through the door, gave a nod to the bartender, and said loud enough to echo, "Someone's throwing a wedding in my backyard tomorrow." I didn't say they could. "Anyone here interested in helping me redecorate?" Every head turned. For a beat, no one said a thing. Then a woman with a fire-red mohawk and a vest covered in skull patches leaned forward, grinning. "You want this loud, funny, or something they'll never forget?" I grinned right back. "Why not all three?" Laughter broke out like a starter pistol. Someone snacked a beer bottle on the bar. A guy they called Tiny, though he looked like he could bench press a Buick, stood up and said, "Tell us when, we'll bring the party favors." As I stepped back outside, the sun hit just right through the oaks. Golden hour, Karen had called it. She was right about that. My backyard did look mag. But if she thought her daughter's wedding was going to go off like a Hallmark movie, she hadn't factored in a Harley choir. And I was more than ready to turn her pretty little fairy tale into a full-blown Southern saga. The morning of the wedding showed up bright, clear, and almost smug, like even the weather wanted front-row seats for the circus that was about to roll through. Birds chirped sweetly from the trees lining Lawson Ridge, completely unaware that in just a few minutes their peaceful serenade would be drowned out by the sweet thunder of revving V-twin engines. I stood on my porch, sipped my coffee, and watched the white tents go up again on my lawn, like we hadn't already crossed the Rubicon. Karen's battalion of vendors stormed back in like it was D-Day for weddings. Hairstylists, photographers, flower wranglers, and a caterer who thought it was just fine to back his van halfway into my garden like he owned the dirt. Not one of them even bothered to knock. To these people, my fence line might as well have been a suggestion. My backyard wasn't sacred ground, it was just their latest Pinterest backdrop, and I was the cranky old man they hoped Photoshop could erase. I didn't say a word, just watched as they fluttered around, rearranging tulips and barking into headsets like wedding day drill sergeants. I didn't have to speak. The wheels of justice or something like it were already spinning. Just down the road, a different kind of party was prepping. Chrome was being shined, denim vests were being slapped clean of road dust, and boots were getting scraped for battle. I'd given my biker friends one simple mission. Show up at 2 sharp, dress like you always do, and bring the ruckus. Meanwhile, Karen was in her full tyrant glory, circling the setup like a wedding planner crossed with a hawk. Her clipboard flailed in one hand, headset glued to her head like she was commanding air traffic, not flower girls. I watched as she actually stopped a violinist mid-bow to reposition his music stand 2 inches to the left. Then, she made the flower girl redo her march 3 times, like it was a Broadway audition. When she spotted me, she gave that Karen smile, tight-lipped, smug, and condescending enough to curdle milk, and chirped, "Hank, we moved a couple things around, but don't worry, your little shed's still untouched. If you could stay inside during the ceremony, that'd be amazing." I raised my mug and grinned. "Wouldn't dream of disturbing your vibe." She gave a thumbs up like she'd just negotiated world peace and vanished back into her chaos. The second she was out of view, I moved. I circled around the shed and plugged in my old outdoor speakers, the ones I usually saved for Johnny Cash while mowing the lawn. But today wasn't for Johnny. Today was for the goats. Specifically, a playlist of screaming goats. Dozens of audio clips, each one more obnoxious than the last, shrieking in high-pitched chaos. Just a little background music to set the tone before my real guests rolled in. By early afternoon, the yard had filled with guests dressed like Easter exploded. Pastel suits, floral sundresses, all of them tiptoeing over my soil like it offended them. The air smelled faintly of compost and hypocrisy. They posed for pictures under my oak tree, completely ignoring the private property sign that someone had oh so cleverly hidden behind a potted hydrangea. I kept smiling, waved now and then. They waved back like I was part of the landscaping, a living gnome maybe. Then, right on time, it started. A deep, slow rumble from down the road, like a thunderstorm with leather jackets. Champagne glasses trembled. Karen's pen paused mid-checklist. Her eyes narrowed. The first motorcycle turned onto the street. Then another. Then 10 more. They rolled in with perfect timing, engines snarling like angry lions. Leather jackets, skull patches, sunglasses, and unapologetic grins. One guy had a Viking helmet. Another had a parrot riding shotgun. A woman in a born-to-be mild shirt cruised by, sipping sweet tea like it was nothing. Guests froze. Someone gasped. Karen dropped her clipboard like it had personally betrayed her. The bikes formed a neat line along the edge of my land. Not one tire touched the sacred wedding zone. They were loud. They were legal. They were glorious. I stepped off the porch and made my way to Moose, the biker-in-chief, 6-foot-something of pure intimidation, who once arm-wrestled a bear on a dare and lived to laugh about it. He handed me a mic. "You ready, Hank?" I cracked a grin. I've been training for this moment my whole life. I hit the remote in my pocket, and suddenly, every speaker I'd hidden across the yard came to life. Not with music, with screaming goats, an entire chorus of them. The result? Glorious confusion. A flower girl panicked and tossed her basket. The violinist yelped and launched his bow. Karen clutched her pearls like she'd just seen a ghost flash her. Guests looked around like the sky was falling, and then, just when it peaked, came Act 2, the biker choir. 20 voices launched into a heavy metal rendition of Here Comes the Bride that would have made a stadium jealous. Guitars screamed from amps I'd tucked behind my shed. Drums thundered like the world was ending. A guy with a ZZ Top beard roared a solo so powerful 2 pigeons dropped out of the tree mid-flight. The only thing better than that was your subscription to this channel. And Karen? She bolted toward me in a rage, heels stabbing holes into my grass, veil flying behind her like she was being chased by the Holy Ghost. "What are you doing? This is a private wedding." I shrugged. "According to your HOA clause, it's a community event. I'm just adding to the ambiance." She turned the color of a boiled lobster. Something about ordinances and noise violations spilled out of her mouth in a high-pitched whine. "Ugh, you mean like hijacking a man's backyard to set up a mimosa bar next to his compost bin?" She opened her mouth, closed it, spun on her heels toward the sheriff, who'd arrived to answer the noise complaint. But the guy just tipped his hat at me and leaned against his cruiser, grinning like a man who just got front-row seats to the best thing he'd see all year. I moved aside as more bikers marched in. One carried a tray of hot dogs, handing them out like snacks at a ball game. The guests didn't know whether to run or reach for ketchup. Kids laughed. Teenagers whipped out phones. Karen's new son-in-law tried to stop a guitarist, who smiled politely and just turned the amp up to 11. Then came the grand finale. Ramona, former opera singer, now grease-stained bike mechanic, stepped to the front and hit a high C that cracked a champagne flute right down the middle. The entire yard fell silent. Even the goats went quiet. And then, from somewhere in the back, a slow clap. Then another. Then laughter. Because once the crazy reached peak absurdity, there was nothing left to do but lean in. People took selfies with bikers. The flower girl high-fived a guy with a dragon tattoo. Even the photographer gave up and started snapping shots like it was a music festival. Karen? She vanished into her tent, screeching into her walkie-talkie like Napoleon on the last day at Waterloo. But the wedding carried on. Strangely, her daughter didn't look upset at all. If anything, she looked relieved, like something real had finally cracked through the porcelain perfection. As the sun started to dip and the golden light touched the tops of the trees, I leaned against my pecan tree, with my arms folded and a heart full of peace. My yard was a glorious mess, but it was my mess. And suddenly, not a soul dared to ignore me anymore. Nobody was pretending I was invisible anymore. And the best part? This circus hadn't even peaked yet. The official wedding ceremony was set for 2:30 p.m. sharp. Karen, in her infinite arrogance, had personally designed the programs. Thick cardstock, gold foil lettering, flowery borders, the whole 9 yards. It read, "The Cranford-Tillman Union, a celebration of elegance." Gag me. She even added a little blurb on the back, waxing poetic about the serene southern atmosphere, lovingly curated by the Homeowners Association. I found one crumpled under a bush near the shed and used it to prop up my rocking chair. At this point, the guests had either embraced the madness or simply surrendered to it. Some were actually having fun. The bikers had claimed my driveway like pirates taking a dock, firing up a portable smoker and grilling ribs like they'd been doing it all their lives. They served sweet tea and played lawn darts with spark plugs. The kids, having the time of their lives. The parents pretended to be appalled, but I caught more than a few sneaking extra ribs and laughing when they thought no one was looking. As the clock crept toward 3, Karen emerged from her bridal tent like a thundercloud in chiffon. Her eyes locked on me, full of fire, as she stormed across the yard in heels sharp enough to till the soil. Trailing behind her was her daughter, Brianna, the actual bride, clutching a bouquet the size of a Thanksgiving turkey and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Her dress screamed junior prom, not wedding. The string quartet, clearly still suffering PTSD from earlier, huddled together like a support group trying to regain composure. Karen stopped just short of my lawn, glared at me like I'd slapped her dog, and hissed, "Hank, I am issuing a formal cease and desist." I raised a brow. "Oh, you gonna file that with the goat choir or the rib committee? This is harassment. You're deliberately sabotaging a legally sanctioned event." I sipped my lemonade like it was the nectar of sweet revenge. "No, ma'am. I'm just enjoying a peaceful little shindig on my own property. I thought we were collaborating, sharing ambiance and all." Her face twitched. Nostrils flared like a mule catching wind of a thunderstorm. "You will regret this. I'll have you fined into oblivion." I gave her that slow, dangerous grin I used back in the Navy when I knew someone had made a mistake. "Karen, if I had $1 for every person who underestimated me, I could have bought this whole neighborhood and turned it into a goat sanctuary." Right on cue, another dozen motorcycles rolled in, parking in tight formation on the side lawn like they were reporting for duty. The riders dismounted like a synchronized squad. One, a guy named Tank, popped open a collapsible drum set and started warming up. Another handed out fake mustaches to the flower girls like party favors. I looked out across the guests. Most had ditched their seats in favor of watching the live show. Someone hollered, "This is better than Netflix." The ceremony was supposed to begin, but Karen was too busy frantically barking into her phone, desperately trying to wrangle the HOA board onto an emergency Zoom call. Her husband, Howard, who had the charisma of a beige wall, stood up at the altar holding a clipboard, looking like he was hoping for a lightning strike. Brianna looked less and less interested in the wedding and more fascinated by the guy juggling beer cans next to the grill. Then something unexpected happened. She walked over to me. She didn't say anything at first, just stood next to my rocking chair, bouquet shaking in her hands. I braced for a meltdown or a tearful plea. Instead, she said, "Mr. Mitchell, can I ask you something?" "Shoot," I said. "Did you really build that tree swing yourself? The one the kids are on?" "Sure did, 30 years back. Used to push my boy on it every Sunday before church." She stared down at the grass, then said, "I didn't want any of this. Not the tents, not the seat covers. I just wanted to get married, not be on parade." I tilted my head. "Then why let your mama turn it into a reality show?" She let out a breath. "Because she's been planning this since I was 10. And she never loses. Only if people let her." There was a long pause. Then she smiled, tiny and honest. "You know, you're kind of a legend around here." I chuckled. "Well, legends come with warning labels." Without another word, she turned toward the crowd, yanked off her veil, and tossed the bouquet over her shoulder. It landed on the grill with a satisfying sizzle. The bikers roared. Karen let out a shriek about contamination and collapsed into a lawn chair like a deposed queen. Brianna walked up to her groom, grabbed his hand, and declared, "Let's get married under the pecan tree. The swing looks better anyway." And they did. They moved the whole ceremony 15 feet over, right onto my land. Just far enough to step outside Karen's sacred HOA perimeter. Their officiant, a biker dressed like Elvis, because of course he was. I didn't question it. He delivered the vows with sincerity and a bit of flair, like the king himself had blessed the union. Brianna and her groom stood barefoot in the dirt, smiling like they meant it. The crowd cheered. The goats bleated in approval. The string quartet finally gave in and joined the chaos, playing a banjo-fied version of the wedding march. Karen said nothing, sat stone-faced, with her hands clenched and her lips vacuum-sealed shut. Howard tried to offer her a napkin. She smacked it away like it was poison. After the vows, the real party kicked off. The bikers set up tables overflowing with food and drinks. Music blasted from my porch. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years wandered over to shake my hand and say things like, "You really put her in her place, and you should run for HOA president." I laughed it off. I wasn't after power. I just wanted my land, my quiet, and the occasional well-earned barbecue. As twilight settled in and the oak trees lit up with string lights, one of the biker women came over. She was in her 60s, silver braids down to her waist, jacket covered in patches from places most people only dream about. She handed me a cold beer and plopped down beside me on the steps. "You did something good today," she said. "I mostly just made noise," I replied. She looked out at the dancing crowd. "No, Hank, you gave people permission to be real, even if it was just for one day." I didn't say anything, just sat there, rocking quietly as the laughter rolled across my backyard. My backyard. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like mine again. Seeing the bride laughing barefoot in my grass, something shifted in me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a crusty old man waging war against the modern world. I felt like a man who'd managed to carve out a little pocket of freedom. Real, stubborn, gritty freedom in a world addicted to plastic smiles and pre-approved landscaping. And honestly, every single goat's scream was worth it. As the sun slipped behind the pines, the crowd slowly started to thin out. But the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses still echoed through my yard like a song that didn't want to end. Kids dashed barefoot through the grass. Wedding guests shared ribs with tattooed bikers. And near my shed, two women, one in pearls, the other in a leather vest, were dancing like they'd just rediscovered joy. But peace? I knew better. Peace with Karen Whitmore was never permanent. Behind that frozen beauty queen smile and armor of hairspray was a woman always plotting the next round. And sure enough, the wheels of her vengeance wagon started turning. Right around 7. Just as Moose was launching into a story about outrunning a tornado on his Harley, a white SUV rolled up to the curb like it was delivering bad news with leather seats. It had the HOA logo slapped on the side like a warning label. Out stepped Edwin Briggs, Maple Hollow's so-called compliance officer, in a sweat-soaked dress shirt, a tie 3 sizes too tight, and a clipboard he held like it was a weapon of mass regulation. He marched up the driveway, adjusting his glasses like that would make him look more official and less like a lost intern at a tractor pull. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Mitchell?" I nodded from my porch throne, beer in hand, surrounded by 3 mutts, 2 bikers, and a karaoke machine someone had duct-taped to a sidecar. Marty glanced around nervously before taking a deep breath and reading from his holy clipboard. "This is an official notice from the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association. You are in violation of Section 14, Article B, unauthorized gatherings without prior board approval. You are hereby fined $6,000 for non-compliance and disruption of neighborhood standards." I raised an eyebrow, leaned forward, and asked, "6,000? Do you want this fine printed on a goat or sewn on a pig's vest?" Marty blinked. "Excuse me?" Before I could explain my livestock payment plan, Karen stormed up beside him, fully reassembled in battle armor. Her helmet hair had been sprayed into concrete, and she now sported a fresh sangria stain right across her blouse like a badge of war. She was livid. "This isn't funny, Hank. You humiliated me. You humiliated my daughter, and you're going to pay for it." I stood slowly, stretched my back, and walked down the steps until we were face to fake face. The whole yard went quiet. Even the goats paused their ambient chaos. "I didn't humiliate anyone, Karen," I said calmly. "You pulled that off just fine on your own." I pointed behind me. "You threw a wedding on land you don't own. Used my tree, my garden, my swing. Didn't ask, didn't notify, just showed up and took over. All I did? Invited a few friends to enjoy the view." She scoffed. "Don't act innocent. This was a hostile takeover." I looked around. Kids roasting marshmallows on a motorcycle tailpipe. The barefoot bride twirling with joy. A group of retirees swapping biker stories with men who hadn't worn sleeves since Reagan was in office. Looks to me like everyone's just having a damn good time. Marty cleared his throat again, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "Mr. Mitchell, regardless of intent, the board has determined this gathering to be in breach of HOA code, and under the charter, we can issue fines and initiate lien procedures if—" I held up a hand. "You sure about that?" He stammered. "Well, yes, the language is very explicit." I turned on my heel, walked inside, and came back out with a manila folder. Handed it to him with a smirk. "That's my deed. Go ahead, read the date." He flipped it open, squinting. 1969? "Exactly," I said. "My grandfather deeded me this land before the Maple Hollow HOA was even a sparkle in Karen's evil little eye. See that drainage ditch? That's the line. Everything on this side, not yours. Never was, never will be." Karen's face turned a shade of magenta that should only be seen on radishes and traffic cones. "That's impossible," she barked. "That land was annexed. We voted." I nodded. "Yep, you voted. But you don't get to vote on something you don't own. And county records back me up. Twice." Marty's face went sheet white. He mumbled something about needing to verify with legal, and backed away so fast he almost tripped over his own sense of self-importance. The crowd erupted. Someone popped a fresh beer. The DJ hit "We're Not Gonna Take It" and turned the speakers to obliterate. Karen didn't move. She stood there, fists clenched, eyes twitching like she was trying to find a time machine. But there was no going back. Her daughter was slow dancing barefoot under the pecan tree. Her son-in-law had ditched his tie and was tossing horseshoes with a guy named Rusty Joe. And Karen's precious HOA power? Gone. Melted faster than a popsicle on asphalt. She spun around, stomped to her car, and slammed the door so hard the streetlight flickered. Then she peeled off down the street, tires screeching, while still parked across 3 driveways. Par for the course. With the queen dethroned and the HOA's teeth yanked out, the whole neighborhood let out a collective sigh of relief. People who'd once clutched their pearls now sipped tea with bikers. Old beefs were squashed. A pie appeared. Carl, from 2 doors down, The man who hadn't spoken to me in half a decade walked up and said, "Hank, that was the most fun I've had since my kids left for college." I grinned and clinked bottles with him. "You ought to swing by more often. We're thinking of hosting a goat rodeo next." He laughed. "If you're running the show, I'm in." Later that night, with the grill's last coals glowing low and the final stragglers wandering off, I sat back on the porch beside Moose and Tank, staring up at the stars blinking through the pines. For the first time in ages, this yard didn't just belong to me. It felt like it did. It breathed again. It meant something. Moose took a slow sip of whiskey and nudged me. "You ever think about running for something? HOA president? Mayor? Local deity?" I shook my head. "Nah, don't need a title." I glanced across the yard, where laughter still danced in the air. "I just need a patch of grass I can call mine." Tank chuckled, raised his bottle, and said, "Well, you earned it, brother." And for once, I didn't argue. "Well, I'll be damned," Moose said, kicking back with a grin. "You throw one hell of a party, old man." I looked out over the trampled grass, still glittering here and there, with the last survivors of Karen's doomed centerpieces. "Wasn't supposed to be a party," I said. "No?" "Nah. It was just supposed to be a reminder." "A reminder of what?" I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me, and watched as one of the goats, Freckles, the tiny spotted one, climbed onto the old swing and rocked herself gently like she'd paid rent. "That some things can't be taken," I said, "not without a fight, not without consequences." By the time the sun peeked over the trees the next morning, the chaos had mostly vanished. On the surface, anyway. The tents were gone. Chairs disappeared like ghosts. The string quartet had made a quiet getaway, sometime after midnight, probably still humming their outlaw version of "Here Comes the Bride." What lingered was something better. Footprints in the dirt. Few empty bottles tucked behind my hydrangeas, and a hum in the air, like the yard itself remembered what had happened. The pecan tree stood tall, the swing still swaying lazily in the breeze, like it was tipping its hat to a memory that somehow turned out better than the original plan. I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee and took it all in. The yard smelled like charcoal, wildflowers, and a bit of biker sweat. The grass looked like it had started to forgive us. Out by the shed, a couple of biker folks were still snoring beneath a tarp, curled up like hibernating grizzlies. And there was Freckles, parked on the porch, gnawing a paper plate like it owed her money. I gave her a nudge with my boot. "You partied harder than half the humans," I muttered. She blinked, completely unbothered. The mess didn't faze me. I'd seen worse on this land. Storms, feral pigs, and that time a drone dropped a meatball sub on my squash bed during a rogue 4th of July. This was nothing. What mattered was the shift. Something had changed, quietly but deeply. The HOA's imaginary lines didn't look like rules anymore. They looked like suggestions with a poor sense of timing. Last night wasn't just my stand. It was ours. The quiet ones, the fence-sitters, the polite smilers who'd kept their heads down while Karen ruled the roost. We remembered we had voices. And better yet, we remembered we had choices. Around noon, the neighbors started showing up. No RSVP, no planning, just showing up. Carl came by with coffee and a donut. Ellen, the same Ellen who once called my scarecrow aggressively grotesque, arrived with a broom and a casserole. Even Ol Harlan, the guy who tried to fine me once for leaving my hose uncoiled, limped over with a trash bag and a sheepish grin. No one said much at first. Just got to work. Quiet, steady, human. No agendas, no votes. Just hands in dirt, shared glances, and the kind of laughter that only comes from doing something real together. By mid-afternoon, the place looked better than it had in months. Someone replanted the flower bed. Someone else fixed the busted fence panel I'd been ignoring for 2 years. And under the pecan tree, where Karen's rhinestone altar had stood like a vanity project, I dug a small hole. No speech, no grand announcement, just me, dirt under my nails, planting a young maple. I set my wife's old garden gnome beside it, the one with the chipped paint and crooked smile she always said looked like me before coffee. I sat there a while, hand on the soil, letting the quiet settle. That's when I heard it, a low rumble from the road. Another motorcycle, but not one I recognized. It pulled into the driveway like it belonged. Sleek, silver, with chrome so clean it could reflect your worst decisions. The rider pulled off her helmet, and there she was, Ramona. Silver braids, leather jacket, voice like thunder wrapped in velvet. The one who shattered Karen's last ounce of control with a single operatic high note. She walked up grinning, holding a small envelope. "You busy next weekend?" she asked. I raised a brow. "Depends. Am I fixing a carburetor or breaking up another HOA wedding?" "Neither," she said, handing me the envelope. "You're officiating mine." I laughed. I really thought she was kidding, but her eyes said otherwise. "I'm serious. Me and Jolene have been talking about it for years. Figured if anyone knows how to throw a wedding with actual soul, it's you. Plus, your backyard has better vibes than any overpriced chapel we've seen." I opened the envelope. A simple handwritten invite. Love, leather, and lemonade. Saturday at 5. Dress code, you. Something tugged at my chest. Not just pride, not just defiance, but purpose. I looked back at the maple sapling, then at her. "I'd be honored," I said. She hopped back on the bike, kicked it to life, and peeled away down the road, waving like she was in a parade. And me? I turned back to the yard, this stubborn patch of earth that had become more than just dirt and grass. It had become a meeting ground, a rebellion, a sanctuary for folks who still believe you could be neighborly without needing a bylaw. And if that meant a few more goats, the occasional karaoke machine, and weddings with barbecue sauce instead of ice sculptures, well, so be it. Later that evening, as I packed up the last folding chair, I found something taped to my front door. No envelope, just a single folded sheet of paper. It was from Karen. The handwriting was tight, stiff and uptight, like someone wrote it with a ruler taped to their knuckles. It read, "Mr. Mitchell, effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as president of the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association. Due to personal stress and irreconcilable differences within the community, I believe it is in the best interest of the neighborhood that I step down. I will be taking time to focus on self-care and reflection. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore." No apology, no admittance, not even a hint of regret. Just an exit, as crisp and cold as a hotel checkout receipt. And somehow, it was the most beautiful thing I'd read in years. I folded it with care, like a little souvenir from the end of an era, and stuck it to the fridge, right next to a faded photo of my wife grinning ear to ear while holding a tomato the size of a newborn. That's the story, friends. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We also have dozens more stories on our channel about how Karen, the head of the condominium, is put in her place. We have sadly collected them all in one playlist. Click and enjoy. Thank you for watching.